Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Own Your Essence podcast, where we get to have deep transformational conversations with some of our favorite people. I am your host, April DeMille, and today I get to introduce somebody that I have actually been connected to on Facebook. But this is my first interaction with him. His name is Judson Lionheart, the Shamanic Chef, and he is also a psychic medium. So, one second. Okay. I just read off your introduction and we are ready to go.
Okay.
So, thank you for being here.
My pleasure
Um,
for having me.
and yeah, I was just saying to the audience, I'd been connected to you on Facebook for a while, but this is really my first interaction with you. So, I'm very excited we finally get to meet.
Good. Yeah, I don't know how long we've been friends, but here we are.
But here we are, exactly. So, I know that with some of the information you provided, you're kind of tapping into the shamanic chef stuff.
Yeah.
Can you kind of give us a little bit about your journey and how you got to this point?
Sure, sure. Where do I begin? I've been in this business, healing business. I've had a practice for about 5 years, 5+ years. I was a chef. I was classically trained as a chef. I worked in New York and Boston and a lot of really fancy places, Michelin star restaurants, James Beard award-winning restaurants. And I kind of focused on that as a career before I got into this. But I also had a really bad drug habit. Wasn't really using while I was working, but I was in a lot of pain. A lot of pain from grief, a lot of loss that I had. And while I was kind of working, I felt like I was running. I didn't know where I was running. I was going somewhere. I really loved working with my hands and with food, and I was really good at it. I didn't really have to think very hard. And I kind of walked into some executive chef roles that at a very kind of young, fresh, well, I was young in my career. I knew I had to be a leader. I knew how to manage teams. And so it just was kind of easy for me. And while I was in Fredericksburg, Texas, that's kind of where my last main role as an executive chef was. Opened up a couple of businesses there, and I worked for a restaurant group, and I was getting sicker to the point where I almost lost my life more than once and
Mm.
twice.
Yeah.
And I would wake up and just kind of be surprised I was still alive and still kind of wake up, hour and a half of sleep, go in, do my job, and it just became so exhausting.
Yeah.
Exhausting for so many reasons. And, I went to rehab, which I felt wasn't really helpful. Not just for me, but for everything that I saw.
Oh,
I needed
you know what? Let's touch back on that. I definitely want to come
sure.
back to that and put a pin in that. You can keep going. I just want to put a pin in that so we can come back to that.
Sure, sure. And I felt like while I was going through this process of kind of getting sobriety, reminding myself that everything's okay, and working through some of the pain, the relationships, the fathers that I had, I knew there was something bigger, you know. Unfortunately, I went back to the same job after being sober, and it didn't work out very long, and I left again, not in a very kind of with my head down. Last day was terrible, but when one leaves that kind of environment, I felt like I could kind of start to breathe again. And so I moved out of Texas, went to Colorado, and I met someone who did energy work, energy clearing, the emotion code, and some other things. And she was a gift. She was wonderful. I didn't have any idea what she was doing. After the first few sessions, I was like, well, something's different. I don't know what the hell you're doing. That was my first experience. I was sober, and so I was probably feeling a lot of anguish and a lot of deep-rooted emotions. And, as I was kind of working with her, I got to a point where I started to realize, hey, you have intuition, you have these abilities. And they just started opening up and
Hmm.
opening up a little bit here and there, not too quickly. And then I got to the point where I said, well, as I took a step back and I wasn't really cooking so much, I was just taking side jobs and praying and meditating, getting kind of more connected and in tune with space, with
Okay.
me, my spirit. I realized, well, something's changing and now I have to do this. And so my first thought was, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to go to SWIHA and Southwest Institute of Healing Arts, for those who don't know, here in Tempe, and I'm going to study. I'm going to train how to actually help those with addiction in the culinary world, in the culinary industry. So I went to school. I went to school with kind of a bigger idea. And when I went through the process, I learned a lot more about me. It was more of a self-study than it was learning all these little tools. All those little tools are just kind of fancy little things to kind of carry and support other people. But at the heart of it, it was more about me finding more depth within me kind of learning to experience things um, more than I ever have emotionally, and
Yeah.
can I kind of connect the dots, you know? And right when COVID hit 2020 in March, I started my business. Kind of a weird time to start, but it was just perfect. I was doing emotion code sessions online, spiritual kind of coaching, things like that. And it moved really kind of quickly. I got an office, you know, and over the last few years, what I've started to kind of focus on kind of are these ideas are what is a shaman? Why do I refer to myself as that? What does that mean in this business? How has that evolved? And I don't necessarily refer to myself as that because, you know, we're trained to kind of be
Right.
humble, and community refers to you as that. And so I'll say shamanic healing. Well, what is shamanic healing? And in my own business, it is my passion. It's my daily prayer. It's my daily meditation, my devotion, where every day, throughout the day, I'll sit in silence and space and listen. I'll work with the four directions and Gaia and Father Sky and the stars, our star friends or star beings. And I
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of those I could talk about one day, but as I sit, I find direction. I sit with clients, use meditation and prayer and shamanic journeys and energy clearing. And what I've developed is a lot of certain language to support other people in new ways. That's really not new. You know, we refer to our pain, we refer to our emotions as different words and different condensations and different things that we say. For example, I hate this part of me. Well, I've been learning a lot lately. I have a teacher, I'm a spiritual guide that says all is pain. All is pain. We hold on to pain. We use these words to define our pain, and our pain is much more, much less. It doesn't matter. It's just a vibratory energy. So
Yeah.
we're that's pain. We don't suggest that it's anything more. And so as I'm learning these things and working with other people and coaching them, people started to really change really very quickly. Um, and more often now I do packages, and I kind of shy away from just one-off sessions, and I do readings. But where my business is now is I'm teaching psychic mediumship workshops once a month to groups where we kind of delve into the details. How do we sit in spirit with spirit? How do we listen? And I'm also leaning into the Akashic field, the Akashic records, where I'm training them to kind of understand, well, it's not just about records. It's not just about you. There's more to it. We learn about healing. We learn about other people's lifetimes and souls. We can hear souls records too. And so those are the things I'm kind of teaching right now. But I've been working on this idea that we'll probably go into a little bit called the Shamanic Chef. And over the past few years, I woke up and I had this idea, and I was like, huh, Shamanic Chef, well, what the hell does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't really understand it because I walked away from the culinary industry. I had my own business, which was changing and evolving with me because I had been through so many shifts. My clients didn't understand who I was at times because I was just all over here and they just wanted the same old kind of simple session. And that
Right.
wasn't me anymore. And so I had to kind of take a step back from my business and say, well, who am I? What am I devoting my life to? And I was really depleted because I
Yeah.
was giving so much and I didn't know what self-compassion was during that time. I was like, I went to this therapy session and she's like, you're really good at helping other people and having compassion for them, but you aren't having any for you. And I was like, what does that
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
I was clueless. And so I went through this period and stage of discovery which really became trying, unearthing a lot of past lives. I was devoting a lot of energy to being in the field. Not that necessarily I woke up and said this was for my best and highest good. I was just in it. And it was kind of the weirdest experience where I was triggered into hearing people's minds on a plane that was so expansive. I could tell them what they were thinking before they were telling me, and it was overwhelming. I
Hmm.
couldn't really work very well in that kind of energy, and I needed to integrate it. It was like telepathy to the power of 11.
Yep, I know that feeling.
And so I was like, well, what's happening? What am I experiencing? And all along that journey, it was really ceremony. I
Okay.
was moving through time, moving through different days, living within different moments and spaces in time, not being lost in them, but just kind of moving through, devoting space and energy and clearing, and just saying, well, what does all this mean? You know?
Mhm.
And so this idea started to develop through that, and I started to get my hands back in food. I was in Colorado a couple of years ago for about 9 months, back in farm to table restaurant. And I didn't want to be there. I didn't really want to be back in food. But what it really reminded me, what God was actually saying to me was, this is you. You hate this part about yourself because you left it. You left it with your head down, your
Oh, yeah.
shoulders were just so depressed. But this is your gift. This is your passion. I wanted you to be reminded of it. And so while I was there for that period of time at this really wonderful farm to table restaurant right on the river in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, it's gorgeous. I was doing this dinner one day, and it was this German wine dinner. And as I was looking down at the flat top, stirring a pot of, it's called rotkohl, it's cabbage, purple cabbage, a German dish. I was doing this exact same thing in Fredericksburg, stirring the exact same dish. And as I was doing that, I was like, God, are we done? Can we move on? And
Yeah.
so my journey was kind of bringing me through this to really literally understand that my hands needed to get dirty again. I needed to be immersed in the energy of more of masculinity, not so
Yeah.
much the male side of me, but the doing, to kind of get out of all the spiritual, misalignments, awakenings, and shift more into just being in this human form,
Hmm.
cooking and chopping, and really immersing myself in all of the scents and smells. And as I did that, everything started to connect. I was like, okay, this starts to make more sense.
Hmm.
And kind of, fast forward, here I am today, working on this idea still, building, rebuilding what my business is now, not what it was then. I think when I moved back to Scottsdale, I thought, well, I'm just going to fall back into where it was. And it was the opposite. It became it became a moment that was so stressed and frustrating that I had to kind of take a step back and just say, where now? Where am I going? God, just guide me. I don't know what's happening. Just show me. And it became kind of lessons of learning, lessons of humbleness and meekness, more attunement and connection to spiritual connection. Because when you don't have a clue, and you really literally have to say, I surrender over and over again,
Hmm.
you it was more, I learned how to be devoted even
Yeah.
deeper.
Yeah.
And so here I am working on, a couple of books, and one is about the shamanic chef. And the idea really started to form a while back about how we devote ourselves to healing and building community and really learning how to invite in this one idea. Food is a blessing.
Hmm.
Food supports me, and there's so many layers to that. And we could talk about food for hours, but we don't have that kind of time. But as I'm building recipes, I'm building menus for possible potential fine dining dinners and experiences. And yeah, the sky's the kind of the limit, and a lot of it involves herbs. I wasn't trained as an herbalist, but I woke up one day and over a series of months, I knew exactly what to use and where to go. It's like I've been here before and I knew why to use these on certain people. So
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's a lot of ceremonial stuff that I think that you're finding intuitively that's involved in this shamanic chef work.
And it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just starts to look like more prayer, more devotion, and more connection. And then when you pull in the chef side of it and the food, it all combines. Food speaks. Food speaks to me. Ceremony is a sacred expression of maybe empowerment or forgiveness or whatever we decide it to be. And
Yeah.
food can be the kind of the medium, the connection to others to create good conversation and to relax, to heal, and to, you know, alkalize, change, shift, change things within, help us to calm down, help our pH to change. It's all aligned.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think that that's um it's hard for me to wrap my head around all that just because I deal with something called mast cell activation syndrome and massive food allergies. So
Mhm.
that's made it to where my basically what it comes down to is my human is terrified to be nourished. And so
Mhm.
I reject, like my body rejects and goes anaphylactic over fucking everything. So that's fun to try to learn to nourish yourself through all that and
Sure.
to feel safe enough to even be in my body through that. But I want to kind of go back a little bit to, well, for one, you said that you went to Sweetheart and I did too. So that
Oh.
could have been how we got connected actually on Facebook. So I went to that school. I think, when did you graduate from there?
Oh, when Sweetheart hit, I was kind of like, I strung it along a little bit. I don't know, sometime in 2020, I think. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think I graduated around, I think it was January of 2019. So it had to have been within about a year of you. And then the other thing that you talked about was, your I'm going to talk about your pathway through addiction, right? Like how this kind of helped you unravel the big parts of your healing journey. And you made a comment about rehab and how that wasn't really working for you. And that kind of struck a chord in me because I also had a massive path in addiction, and I had put myself in rehab. Um, God, back in it was 2012, after a pretty tragic family event, and I knew that I didn't want to live the life of an addict, and I wanted help, but I didn't know where to start. So I did put myself in a rehab, and in any rehab, they always teach you AA and NA and all the 12 steps and all the things. Rehab was great for me. The 12 steps after that never worked for me at all. It actually and you might be able to understand this because you have the intuitive psychic mediumship about you, but for me it was actually a trigger.
Mhm.
um, I would walk into a room and be so overwhelmed by the pain and suffering of everybody there that I was absorbing that it made me want to go home and use, right? So I was like, yeah, this doesn't, I'm not gonna say that the 12 steps doesn't work for everybody, or I'm going to say it works for a lot of people. It doesn't work for everybody. It's not the end all be all for everybody. And I know that for me, it wasn't a fit either. I had to do it more
Mhm.
spiritually, and I've been sober since then.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that was that part of your story. I was like, oh, yeah, that totally hits. Um, so can you talk a little bit? I know you said you have this book that you're wanting to dive into about the shamanic chef. Can you talk a little bit too about the other book?
Yeah, that's kind of it's been a lifelong journey. I grew up in Houston, and we talked a little bit about that before. I'm from Texas, and life it wasn't always bad, but I experienced a lot of ugly things. My dad was an addict and gambler, cocaine addict, and his side of the family were abusers, highly affected by addiction.
Mhm.
And my dad committed suicide when I was young. And so all those happened at a very early age. But then my mom got married several other times. She's been married about 5 times. She'll probably really enjoy me to share this stuff. I'm writing about it, but you know, it was hard to have that much stress at an early age and not know why, not
Mhm.
kind of to see your father, and then one day he's not there, and just to misunderstand because no one was really honest up front. And even if they were, how would you describe death and suicide to a 3-year-old? You probably wouldn't.
Yeah, like how do you even put those into something a 3-year-old would understand?
Right. And all along this time, I was around a lot of drinking. I was around a lot of drug addicts, and I kind of knew it. I had gifts at a very young age, but I did. No one explained what a psychic was. Went to
Okay.
church later on, and they were like, "Psychics are wrong. Psychics aren't connected to God." I'm like, "How is that even true?" You know? Um, but yeah, this book started to happen. Well, let me go back a little bit. You know, I lost my dad, and my mom was married to a lot of assholes, a lot of guys who were abusive and drug and alcoholics. And she had been going through her codependent issues, and throughout all that time, I was experiencing a lot of rage and loss, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And that took me through a lot of years of drug addiction and rehab. um, and then one day I was sitting and my dad was there, and I was like, well, why are you here? What the fuck do you want? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I realized how much pain I still had in regards to all the things that happened, but not so much his loss, yes, but all the shit that I had to experience without him. And it was like, where were you? Why weren't you here? I needed somebody to help me through this. I had to
Mhm.
figure it out myself. I had to do it on my own. I had to wake up. I had to wake my mom up some days. I had to fix and figure my way through it. And it was hard, you know.
Mhm.
And as I started to kind of sit and meditate and connect with him more, it became our space of healing. Who thought, a guy that was trained to be intuitive and a coach and do all these modalities, you could actually heal your relationship with your father who committed suicide a long time ago. And now we know that stages of grief and mediums, they really go hand in hand.
Oh yeah.
Was something I was immersed in, and no one really said anything about it. I was experiencing it. I was learning on my own. I was opening up and awakening to this kind of spiritual gift at the time I was healing and communicating with my dad and my grandparents and my great aunts. And he was there. I felt him so close. And, you know, as we were connecting a couple of years later, I decided, I need to write about this experience, not so much about the loss of him, but what's rage?
Hmm.
Why was I so enraged? And I think each of us has a beautiful story. And in shamanic work and shamanism, our story is healing.
Yeah.
We're meant to share our story. We're meant to carry our story on. We're meant to hold stories and spaces and be vulnerable and be open so others can heal and receive. And so as I started to writing kind of journal, I didn't really see where this was going. I was just kind of channeling what we were talking about. And my grandfather came in, who was married 5, 6 times as well. And it's like, why are you here? And at the root of it, I realized there was so much stress and pain and anger and fear and resentment about all the men who left, even the ones that are still alive, and all the abandonment that I felt and all the shame that I felt not being wanted, and all of it just kind of compiled. And I said, well, this has to be healing.
Yeah.
And so as I'm writing this story still, it's just evolving like everything does. And it doesn't always make sense why I'm writing it this way, but a lot of it is so others can understand our deep rooted worry, our deep rooted loss from someone that has experienced a lot of it. But also, men do leave. Men don't see the importance of being a family member or honoring the relationship or growing and evolving. Uh, Many men stay the same. Many men run, stay stuck. I saw it through every single stepdad and father figure in my life.
Yeah.
And so I had to talk about it. I had to talk about all these different layers. And, as a psychic medium, it's coming from a unique place too,
Hmm.
where I'm communing with them. I'm talking to them. I'm hearing their stories. I'm hearing what happened with their fathers and why they were also kind of anxiously afraid of being home. They were afraid of staying still. They were afraid that it might be too much. And
Yeah.
so that's what they used. That's why they drank. That's why they moved on to other women or cheated. That was all in all of the stories. There was so much addiction and abuse.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like we're twins because the whole story you're sharing, I have almost exactly. I mirror so much of that. And I want to ask, do you think a lot of um, these male wounds are about the whole toxic masculinity that's being taught in the world? Do you think a lot of it has to do with that?
You know, I know a lot of toxic men. I grew up with them. I was toxic.
Mm-hmm.
I was
Mm-hmm.
very toxic and very sick until I grew out of it. I still have an ego. I still have
Mm-hmm.
things that go on with me.
Yeah, we're still human.
I'm still human. I'm still an asshole. I can be. I
Yeah.
still have my own stuff. I don't necessarily look at all of the things going on in society. I kind of see them and notice them. What I do misunderstand sometimes is why people disregard their identity
Mm-hmm.
and masculinity and own it, because I think it's truly important, or own themselves being a leader and a warrior. I think that's what we need more of. I think that we need people who aren't afraid to sing or use their voice and to be who they are,
Yeah.
no matter what sex or origination or whoever they decide to be. I think we've lost sight of our true power and we've lost sight of why men are important. Women are toxic too,
Oh, totally.
you know?
Absolutely.
And so who are we to blame?
Yeah.
And what I see is a lot of blaming and a lot of shaming, and a lot of misinterpretations because media, the peripheral things going on in this world, everything is so disorganized, confused, and unfortunately, it's affecting a lot of people.
Well,
We
yeah.
think the spiritual community is so big, and it's growing, it's becoming massive, but it's probably 2% of the population.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we know at spiritual connection or the spiritual world. And there's so many needs, or there's so many things that we're still learning about our society and our societal views. I think it's just a story of history repeating itself.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like to me. And as a psychic, I don't fear. I don't necessarily, I have fear, have my own fears, but I don't necessarily fear moving through my life or this world worried about toxic masculinity or is someone going to come harm me most of the time.
Yeah.
Um, I just pull myself away from that and I say, well, I'm going to respect it as it is
Hmm.
and not pay attention and listen because it's going to affect my viewpoint. And I want to honor my own and create and decide for myself. I don't want to have interference. And so that's kind of where I am.
Yeah. Well, that's actually good that you bring that up because that's a reason why I stopped watching TV and watching the news like back in what I think it was like 2009.
Yeah.
Completely stopped because I didn't need anything else ruining my day for one.
Right.
My life was crazy enough without the fucking help. So I didn't need that. But on top of that, you're right. There's a part of us that has to kind of disengage so we can come to our own center and make our own conclusions, come to our own conclusions and just approach things differently without the idea of what society pressures are supposed to feel like or look like or be labeled as and all the things. So I would agree with that one a lot.
What my heart, my being, or have been mentioning to me a lot is put away the media, put
Yeah.
away all the things that kind of disguise real truth.
Hmm.
You see a lot of repeating things on social media, and it's not all bad. Some of it's really uplifting. We need it, at times, and there's a lot of good poetry there. But what my heart is telling me and those that really are kind of yearning for more depth, more soul connection, is to really let that go for a little while
Hmm.
and read, sit and listen and meditate. Meditation is probably one of the best gifts I've had. And it's what really brought me out of my addiction, but it wasn't the only thing. It was hard. during those periods, during those days where I was still troubled and I was still using. Um, but meditation also helps me to see that I don't have to be so much in my thought or using my mind as much.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
We have to learn to get comfortable with stillness because we're such a busy world.
Yeah.
Busy, busy, busy. And that's what keeps us so disconnected.
Mm.
Yeah. So, that's pretty powerful stuff. Do you mind if I ask you a few more questions?
Absolutely.
Um, you talk about a little bit on the Akashic records for those of the audience that don't know what that is. Can you explain that a little bit?
I kind of started referring to it as the Akashic field of light. And
Okay.
what that means to me, or how I describe that, it's a layer of frequency and vibratory energy that is all thought, is all persons, is all worlds, is all frequencies. It's like, okay, well, how do I wrap my mind around what that means? It's like any person who's been alive that's had a voice who has said something, it's there. It's like
Hmm.
a recorder of all those things and all those things that were present during certain time energies. But it's also a space of learning. We weren't the only people here to discover things. And so there's a lot of energy in the field, especially whales, if you get into that kind of frequency, that really draws through the energetics of how to be more present and how to use frequency and light on your own body, on your own energy, how to show others how to walk back home. A lot of what I've done in my business, my healing business, has been soul retrieval work and through the Akashic field. And it's not like I have to do a whole lot of detail work. We open up an experience and we say, this time is coming up for you, this timeline, this lifetime. And I'm not going to go too far into this, it can get confusing, but our history isn't chronological. We think my last life was here,
Right.
right at this point,
Right.
right before this life.
Hmm.
No, that
Yeah.
is absolutely not how it works. It might have been over here on another planetary system,
Yeah.
and now we're just being brought to this experience because we need it. We're
Yeah.
learning from it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
We're not as linear as we'd like to think.
Right, right. It is absolutely false.
Yeah,
Big
that's
word here.
hogwash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what I've seen is a picture of a tree of light and all the branches and all the little like fruit on the branches and things like that, even a vine, everything weaves through all the lives. And so with the Akashic field, and I'll get to that soul retrieval, what I do is I help kind of walk people back home. Sometimes, especially like my father, which I'm working on now, we're writing about that. His spirit, his soul is in more than one place now. And it's not necessarily supposed to be. He just chooses for it to be like that because he's been lost.
Yeah.
And a lot of it had to do with suicide and his other lives. And I'm guiding him back to more connection to his truth.
Hmm.
Um, And any of us can do that with the Akashic field. We just sit, and we open it up to it, and we learn, and we kind of direct through it, and they'll kind of guide us. Um, but time itself really can be a struggle if we're working in too many fields, and sometimes our consciousness can be devoted to too many times at once. And so when we walk back gently home, we're more fully in the now and we kind of close windows here and there. Not that we don't have that as an opportunity to still live in. It's more about why am I experiencing so much? Is that a problem? Am
Yeah.
I now in the present moment feeling so depleted, so lost or flustered because so many other things are happening with my spirit that I actually need support through that? But the Akashic records, we'll kind of devote that space also to working on everyone that's in the experience. It's not just one person that's receiving. The beauty of it is there's so many layers there everybody receives, you know. So
Yeah.
I hope that helped to understand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I am a big fan of diving into the Akashic. I like to think of it as cell memory for all the possibilities.
Mhm.
Um, and like you said, there are so many things happening simultaneously that our energy can be kind of pulled from us. And it's almost like we have to go in there and call some of that back and close out some of those trajectories so it's not, like you said, depleting us. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can
So,
also change and redirect certain timelines when we're asked to. And what that really means is it's not like we're changing our experience now, is we're just kind of calling in a better, higher vibing one for us. And we move through it in a way where our guides will kind of nudge us into a better energy.
yeah, absolutely. Do you mind if I ask you? I know that you are transitioning. You had talked about transitioning from chef life and into more healing work.
Mhm.
What would you say were some of the biggest challenges in that, aside from like the personal interference? Like, were there other challenges that kind of come up around that?
Um, from like being a chef or moving on from it, what do you mean?
Well, I know that you talked about like you were already doing that work and then you kind of had to put it down and then you kind of went back into it. And now you're incorporating that piece into the healing work you're doing now. But what are some of the challenges that you might be experiencing moving into that transition?
I'm not without like I have a role in a kitchen now. I'm not completely fully into my, Shamanic Chef and my business, but I'll say these kind of things. Being in the culinary industry reminds me of parts of myself I didn't necessarily want to be reminded of
Okay.
because it's still there. The drugs are still there. The overuse of alcohol, the drinking on shift, using on shift, it hasn't stopped. People think the culture has changed. It hadn't changed that fast. It is not changing. It's not growing that quickly.
Yeah.
It's still lost in that kind of affect of overstress, too much stress. And I don't necessarily like the idea of continuing to work in a restaurant. It's just kind of a part of where I am now. But the blessing of it is it kind of helps me to get out of all this and just do. And sometimes I really needed that. Sometimes we
Hmm.
just need to stop thinking and just enjoy being very hands-on. Even when we do healing work, with Reiki and other types of energy that we use, we're holding, and hopefully we're not so much in our mind in that moment. It's just a kind of a blessing to have that option. That's something that's very passionate. Because I'm kind of transitioning into this newer idea of a shamanic chef and shamanism and connecting it all. You know, it's not all clear where spirit is leading me, and so that's very frustrating to me because I want to be in control. I want to know, tell me
Yeah.
now.
Yeah,
You know
for
what I mean?
sure.
I want to know exactly where the fuck this is going.
Yeah.
Where am I going to publish my book? Where am I going to write this? I'm
Yeah.
working on an oracle deck, a medicine deck too, that I've had an artist, build create some proofs for me. And I'm like, what does all this mean? I want to know now. And one of the blessings that I've learned is that I I just have to show up and I just have to put one foot in front of the other and not worry so much. And sometimes that's hard for me, especially growing up in a lot of traumatic experiences. It's very unsettling.
Oh, yeah.
And when you grow up in a lot of dysfunction and you're confused as to what's going to happen next, you're I had to learn how to isolate more and to calm down on my own because at any moment something would have changed. I would have had to move, or I would have had to prepare to move, or there would have been another explosion or argument. And so when you're a young kid and you're trying to prepare for that, you really have to learn. Well, I had to learn, teach myself, train myself to know my calm moments and know how to do it. And even as an adult, when there's a lot of uncertainty and I have to lean into faith and the unknown, that still kind of feeds into those times growing up,
Hmm.
and I have to learn to root better through them. And that's not so much a challenge, it's just what I've experienced. And I'm still learning. I'm still in class every day. But one of the trying moments of changing my career and going to Colorado to cook, I felt like I lost it all. I felt like everything collapsed. And then I decided to leave that restaurant and come back to work in Arizona, and I still felt afraid. I wasn't sure. And even to this day, things are so different. And I brought into my experience, I have these expectations of what I need, what it should look like, what I want it to look like. And being in the restaurant world, you have expectations, you do your prep, you know what you do, you know how to do it, but at any moment something could go wrong, or
Yeah.
something just will stop the restaurant, will stop the flow, and you have to kind of pick up and reorganize and do it within 30 seconds, and that's much pressure.
No pressure.
Pressure at all, why you're being yelled at, why somebody else is flustered, or you're the one that can't organize because you screwed up,
Hmm.
and your nervous system is stuck in fight or flight. And so it's like you're not really in battle, but you're trying to adjust your physical body, your nervous system, and your mind without the ego to calm down while it's organized chaos, you know. And I have had to learn how to kind of flip the switch to get into my work early in the morning when I'm seeing a client, and I have to go in the restaurant. And what I don't like is, unfortunately, I really wish it wasn't like that. I really wish I could just kind of let it go for good. But apparently, something spirit keeps drawing me back into the work with food, into the work with my hands, because there's something bigger I'm being taught now. And I don't, and I'm deciding to say yes.
Hmm.
I could say no, and I could say, fuck that. I'm not going to do this shit anymore.
Hmm.
Screw you, God. And I've had moments where I've said that,
Yeah.
I get really pissed off and passionate. I want it to be like this. And what I hear is, I want something bigger for you. I want something more. I want that greatness for you. And that's a very, not necessarily the ego greatness. It's it's humbling to have to go through all this much in a life like yourself, to experience all these things.
Yeah.
And I had a bad ego, and that would push off a lot of things, push off finances, would push off me. And what I really experienced as an overall concept was an ego, not so much dying, but calming down, starting to learn how to be more humble. And you
Hmm.
talked about going into AA groups, NA groups, and I remember going into those groups and I hated them too. Everybody who spoke looked ill still.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I didn't want to be caught up and drained in that.
Hmm.
Everyone talked about their stories, and I'm like, my stories aren't fun for me. And a
Hmm.
lot of it had to do with humor, and they've got through that point where it doesn't really bother them. But I didn't want to be reminded. I don't want to call myself an addict or an alcoholic. And I realize now, when I look back, that's about being more humble, not so much about referring to yourself, this is you, or I'm choosing to say that's not who I am. It's just, don't disguise who you were. Embrace it and know that it's still traumatic and it's still an issue.
Yeah.
Don't let it kind of like manipulate you.
Yeah. And I think that's the problem I had with the system too, was because at the beginning of every meeting, sure, are we addicts in that moment temporarily? But what we were doing was we were affirming the fact that we had this illness. We were affirming it, so we kept creating it at that point. And that's where I was just like, this doesn't feel right for me. I'm not going to give over my power like this. I'm not. And so I had to detach from that reality completely.
Yeah, I felt very much the same, and I still do. I
Yeah.
rewrote the 12 steps, you know, and as I'm writing this book about, man, a lot of it has to do with my addiction and their addiction. And, I don't feel like I want to hide out anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it needs and has to be talked about and worked through. I'm developing a program to help those with drug addiction and other types of addiction. And that's just kind of something. I woke up one day and it was like, here it is. And I started to write pages and pages on notes and detailed diagrams around shame spirals and these kind of things that we kind of had to go through and had
Yeah.
to learn how to get out of. And how do we recreate this? Not necessarily change how it's all done. There's still the blue book, but is there a better way? Is what I always said.
Hmm.
I'll go back to this when I went into rehab. The first week or so it is detox, and you're just pretty much prescribed pills again. Things to calm you down, things to kind of keep the sickness in there just a little bit longer, just to make sure you sleep through it. And it felt pretty sickening to me, even as I was experiencing it. And it was hard being there and kind of learning I was part of it and learning I didn't look like these people. Why the
Hmm.
fuck am I here too? But
Yeah.
also learning that I've been through what they have, and our stories all align in some way, and they need as much help as I do. So,
Hmm.
now I think that part of my story is to kind of work with addicts that are willing, um, in a different way, not to necessarily retell their story, but to help do more shadow, ego, and direct work and to hold space and ceremony for that. And that's not all that I do, but I think that's just kind of where the journey is headed a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I think your journey is one of empowerment, and I'm excited to see where it goes. Do you have, aside from the books, do you have any like other ideas or projects that you kind of want to see come to fruition?
You know, yeah, a couple of things. I'm working on with a friend, possibly building some retreats in Mexico. He built a beautiful retreat center called Aqueduct de Baja, and it has these arches through it. He's kind of like an engineer architect, and we've talked about doing a shamanic chef, multiple retreats and healing retreats for those, and we're kind of in the works, talks about that. And you really just have to rebuild and build community, to do those, because you can't just expect anyone's going to buy a ticket, right? So right now, I think I'm learning how to rebuild, not from the ground up, but from a different place. With my psychic mediumship workshops, I'm learning how to organize that and build a course, a bigger course that's very detailed and very organized on how to use intuition, what to do when this happens, and how do we sit with spirit in our soul, and what does that mean?
Hmm.
So those are some of the bigger kind of ideas that I'm working on, but more just in-person workshops here. And I'm thinking about doing some online ones, but those are just in the works.
Got it. Got it. So, when you are doing psychic workshops, do you do any of that online or do you just offer the psychic medium stuff like virtually? Are there ways that other people can work with you aside from being in person?
Sure. No, I do. It's like 50-50. I do in-person and online Zoom sessions, hour and a half, up 2 hours. I'm rebuilding my web page right now, the Shamanic Chef web page. But on my social media, you can connect with me. In the meantime, things are going a lot slower than I expected them to,
Hmm.
for the build. But here in a month or so, it should be all up. I hope. And but people can still communicate with me on social media. And yes, for healing sessions, I do online and in person in Scottsdale if you're in the area. Readings, Akashic record work. Um, and I do a lot of things with, actually, I'm working on incorporating some plant ceremony, uh, and as kind of a shamanic worker, I think that's become more important to me as well. And that's something bigger in the works where it'll be a longer session with beautiful integration.
Okay.
Um, but yeah,
Okay.
shoot me a message. That's the best way to get in touch with me, or an email.
Okay. Perfect. And do you have any last words of wisdom for our listeners before we hop off of here?
I have a funny one. My dad was talking to me through this because I asked him to be here, because a lot of this story is about him and
Right.
from him. You know, he says, "Don't disguise what we are. We're we're exactly where we are and why we are, and we don't want to work with what we have. And some days we just don't know where we're going. And while we're going onto this trajectory in our lives, evolving, sometimes people will show up that we don't understand our inner lives and we really need them.
Yeah.
And while we fight our connection or the intimacy or why they're there in our experience, they're all mirrors.
Yeah.
More often, people disguise or disassociate or try to disprove God in the people sitting right across from them. And that is doing is it's like an injustice. You're
Yeah.
doing kind of a disservice to God so much, not like God cares, right? He doesn't see it like that. He or she, spirit. But what you're doing is you're pushing away a moment of your evolution.
Hmm.
And your evolution is it's a has to. It's not a has been. It's something that you're going through now. And spirit always knows exactly who you need to, not just what you need and why you need it, even if you can't see it. Like our guides and our soul, they know exactly where we're headed and they'll always nudge us back on course.
Yep.
And you know what? They know our future very much like spirit.
Yeah.
And they provide us with all the necessary needs. And what my father says, and my grandmother's here too, they'll say, we worry kind of like we're white knuckling it. We worry so much and we're so afraid. Why? God's not worried.
Yeah. Right.
Why
We've
are we
already,
ourselves
yeah,
to this?
we've already won.
We have one
Yeah.
gift. And one more thing, reminder, when we're so embracing the journey, life becomes a miracle. It's magical
Hmm.
every moment, every day.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. If you want to hang out with me 1 second, I'm just going to say goodbye to our audience. Thank you guys for listening. Judson, thank you again. It's
you.
been an absolute pleasure, and I am very excited to share this episode with everybody. So, you guys, we will see you next time. Bye.